Hello, my friends, and welcome to live coverage of GP Toronto, coming at you live out of snowy Canada. My name's Riley, and I'm joined, of course, by Eduardo Sajgalik. He's a Canadian himself and a modern expert, and it's our great pleasure to bring you continued coverage of this modern event. Caleb Scherer and Ben Weitz here. Looks like Weitz might be rocking an Eldrazi list by the look of things based on that opening hand. A Spy Bluff Canal for Scherer. What immediately do you start thinking of here?
Well, Caleb's very well known for playing Storm. So if he's not playing Storm here, something's gone very wrong. Or he's decided to improvise, but most likely we're seeing Eldrazi Tron versus essentially Blue-Red Storm.
Looks like it might be that, with an Expedition map coming down off the Urza's tower there. And Scherer opening things up with a Baral. That's a nice one here, enabling him to really look to be in a position to go off here.
Right, exactly. So Caleb basically jamming the 2-drop because Ben's only way to really interact with it is something like Dismember or Warping Whale. So it puts which Ben has in hand, but puts the pressure on him and doesn't allow him to necessarily sack his Expedition map, putting him at risk from dying to this Baral essentially if Caleb gets to untap with Baral, Ben would probably lose on the spot, so that's why you see Ben dismembering the Baral here. It's just a force play.
Yeah, 4 life that Weitz is happy to play there to get rid of Baral, the Chief of Compliance. And an important thing that you mentioned there, Eduardo, is the fact that an untapping on turn 3 with Baral or with a Goblin Electromancer often will end the game.
Right, exactly. So that's why Ben respects this. But for Ben to win this match, usually the Eldrazi Tron list play 4 Chalice of the Void on average. So what Ben is looking to do is play Chalice for X equals 2.
All right.
Once Ben lands a Chalice for X equals 2, that destroys every ritual in Caleb's deck. That means that he cannot play a Goblin Electromancer or Baral, and it essentially means that Caleb cannot go off.
And even a Grape Shot, right, can't be cast through a Chalice there.
Well, so with Grape Shot, the card can be cast, and the original's countered. It's just that all the copies would resolve.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. So that's what happens, is the original happens, that will get the counter trigger, but the Storm trigger will resolve and do all the copies.
So if you can somehow chain a bunch of 1-drops and 3-drops together, you can get a big Storm count going. But as you mentioned, very, very unlikely for that to happen here. And so Weitz will be looking for that as a way forward here in this matchup, which traditionally is pretty bad for Tron, am I right?
It's bad for Tron usually, but the fact that Eldrazi Tron can play those 4 Chalices puts it a little ahead on the matchup. If the Storm player's hand is not optimal, like in this case with Caleb. The fact that Ben got to draw the natural Tron means that even a Remand here would not be sufficient to stop this Chalice.
Oh dear, and Weitz able to attack in for 3 with a Matter Reshaper as well. So things looking pretty bad for Scherer here already, who has, as you mentioned, brought his favourite deck to get it done. But right now, in the face of Eldrazi Tron, with a Walking Ballista as a follow-up play here, things aren't looking good for Scherer. Gifts ungiven here.
Yeah. So it's actually interesting now that we have access to Caleb's list. One thing that he decided not to be just cold to a Chalice for 2 and runs a main deck Repeal. However, the fact that Ben managed... So basically, he needs to cast that Repeal on Chalice to be able to go off.
He's got some really, really interesting interactive options here. As you mentioned, there is that Repeal, which is a nice catch-all answer to many permanents. But the other card that he's playing a real bit of spice here. He's gone down to the kitchen and popped some spice on the top of this bowl of spaghetti here. He's got an Unsubstantiate in his list. It's a 2-mana return target creature or spell to its owner's hand.
Yeah, it's basically a hybrid type of spell. So instead of running the Third Remand, you use that to bounce a creature. Because humans is popular, bouncing a Thalia can be of use, bouncing a Meddling Mage.
Meddling Mage, of course.
Meddling Mage being more important than Thalia, since you can get through Thalia with more cost-reducing creatures, but Meddling Mage kind of stops you. So that's Caleb's way to not auto-lose to that card.
Now, Caleb Scherer here has cast a Gifts Ungiven, which is resolved uncontested. Now, usually, this is a position where you start thinking, oh, dearie me. Things are going very well for the Storm, play very bad for their opponent. But this Chalice is representing a real issue here for Scherer, although this Gifts pile makes it, puts him in a good position to clear the Chalice out the way.
Right, and this is a fascinating Gifts pile. Essentially, Caleb is putting Ben in a position where Ben cannot give the Repeal or the Noxious Revival, since that might spell Lights Out. So that means that Caleb is going to get the Past in Flames and Gist Ungiven, and Caleb is basically going to structure his game plan in such a way to play that long game, and hoping that Ben can't put more pressure. then this Walking Ballista and Reshaper.
So Weitz does exactly what you said there, Eduardo. Good call from you, mate, as we have Scherer add the Past in Flames into his hand. Now, that's going to be able to give the Repeal flashback, but he's a fair way off from... I mean, this is his way going forward, right? This is all about how he's going to win this game.
Exactly. And the problem with doing the line you describe of Past in Flames into Repeal is that that's 5 mana, essentially. So sure, you get rid of the Chalice, but then you have no mana and you're tapped out, and then your opponent just goes, well, I'll just replay this Chalice.
Replay this Chalice, that's right. So you've got to put yourself in a position where you can repeal the Chalice and then start to go off. And that's no easy feat, especially as all of your 2-drops are essentially blank pieces of paper.
Right. Anything that costs 2 in Caleb's deck does pretty much nothing. With the exception of Grape Shot, as we discussed earlier. But yeah, you can see Caleb's hand is full of these 2-drops.
So Scherer here is just going to continue to develop his hand and sort of sculpt that grip that's going to get him over the line here. But he's under a lot of pressure already. We've seen here the Walking Ballista in addition to Mana Reshaper. Oh, whoa. Did that Metamorphose resolve? No. Just to increase that Storm count. Okay, this is the play we saw. This is an obscure line here, Eduardo.
Right, so Caleb is basically doing the math, and he realizes that Ben right now can just pump the Ballista twice on his turn, which would get it up to 4+, and then that damage also cascades later since Ben can remove the damage. So Caleb decides, okay, this Ballista's too fast to clock. I need to just play some spells to get rid of it. It's okay. Anything that buys me time. Anything. Super
unintuitive interaction there. You would think that Grape Shot is just a blank ski against something like Chalice of the Void, but here, a huge piece of, great utility here for Scherer, although now he's staring down the barrel of a 5/5 Trampling Haste, where Eduardo, that's not good news for him.
Not at all. And the fact that this is a 2-turn clock was what Caleb was trying to avoid. And now that he's facing it, he's in a position where this is probably going to be game in Ben's favor, since he won't have time to repeal the Chalice plus go off.
Weitz slams all of his permanents onto the battlefield, and between the Mana Reshapers and the Reality Smashers, Scherer has seen enough. So a great observation here from you, Eduardo, was the fact that you said this matchup breaks across the back of the Chalice of the Void, and that's exactly what we saw there. Storm is a traditional predator of these big mana decks that sit around, fiddly-fart around with their mana and eventually hope to land something like a Khan. Storm's like, whatever, man, I ain't give a damn. I'm just going to go off through this, play a Goblin Electromancer, play the Baral, and just slam in with a huge Grape Shot. However, that single card, main deck Chalice, it can be hugely decisive in a matchup like this.
Right, and there you see the difference in the 2 big mana decks between Tron and Eldrazi Tron, is that Eldrazi Tron can put a pressure, and they are not affected by Chalice of the Void. So a Chalice for 1 or 2 hitting so many of the decks in the format gives it an edge. I mean, at the same time, Caleb had a second mana creature, and enough rituals, might have been able to go off on turn 3 anyways. The fact that Ben didn't have much interaction was very key to Caleb's win.
Yeah, I think that Dismember was obviously... Yeah, exactly. That Dismember was obviously key there on turn number 2, and I think the Storm... I mean, Scherer as a Storm player has just got to take his licks in situations like this. But look, we'll see how things shake out after sideboarding, and let's have a look, cast our eyes over what Ben Weitz might be dealing with here in his sideboard as we cast our eyes across his deck list. Things like Relica Progenitus might be of interest to him. I mean, are we looking at things like a Grafdigger's Cage, perhaps, as well?
Right. So Ben Weitz has a lot of cards that allow him to grind out or go over the top. But what he's probably going to look to board in are those 2 Grafdigger's Cages and the 2 Relica Progenitus, since both are relatively clean answers to Past in Flames. That being said, usually the Storm player's plan is to board in Caleb's case, all 4 pieces of the puzzle, and essentially try to combo off through just cards in hand rather than in the graveyard.
Now, when you say pieces of the puzzle, you're not talking about specific cards that come together in pieces. You're actually talking about the actual literal card pieces of the puzzle, the sorcery from Shadows over Innistrad.
Yes, exactly. It's impressive how much that sorcery has changed the Storm deck sideboard, because it allows the Storm deck to essentially run relevant divinations.
Yeah, but this is what I want to talk about. This is a card that is like a very low draft pick. It's not a constructed powerhouse by any means, and all of a sudden it's seen huge play in a tier 1 modern deck. Why is this card so good? And if it's that good, why is it only in the board?
Sure. So the idea of pieces of the puzzle is you can run 1 or 2 of what we call anti-hate pieces. So things that get rid of permanents that would stop you from winning the game, such as Chalice of the Void. So we can run 2 Shattering Spree, 1 Wipe Away, 2 Giga Drows, knowing that it's very hard for your opponent to deal with everything, so the piece of the puzzle gets you deeper. And the fact that it puts the cards in the graveyard means that any incidental sorceries or instants you hit past the 2 you want are in your graveyard for future Passing Flames.
And the fact that it's selection that doesn't rely on the graveyard in the first instance means that it's not affected by something like a Relic of Progenitus or whereas something, say, like an extra way to get ahead in cards, something like Think Twice, as just as a rough example, it plays a different role here. Very surprising and super interesting, piece of technology in the Storm decks.
Yes, exactly. And this is why, for me, playing against Storm postboard is some of Modern's most interesting Magic, because you have to figure out what your opponent's game plan is. Piece of the Puzzle is the most common one, but I've seen everything from that to Madcap Experiment into Platinum.
Oh yeah, going big or going home. Well, we do also have Caleb Scherer. He may not be on the Storm plan in the same sense here, because of course often we move away from Grapeshot postboard and into something like Empty the Warrens. 2 copies of that sitting in Shearer's sideboard. Are you expecting that one to come in here?
So it probably comes in. However, it's worth noting that Ben can just slide in 2 Ratchet Bombs.
Oh yeah.
And may decide to do so just because Ben has to respect the power of Empty the Warrens. He's probably, as for what he's going to take out, the All Is Dust is the slowest card, so that's probably going to come out, as well as something like an Endbringer might come out because it's pretty expensive sorcery speed. So he's probably going to cut some of his more top-end cards for cheaper interaction. Warping Wheel, 2 copies in the main deck being by far the most key card against Storm. You can exile Baral, you can counter a key, Past in Flames. You can actually counter a piece of the puzzle.
Oh yeah,
for what it's worth.
Yeah. There we go. So that's going to be a huge card for Ben Weitz, as we see Caleb Scherer down to 6. Not looking good for our Storm player here. I think he's hot off 2 buys. We looked over the buy list this morning. Eduardo, Scherer, one of these players who benefited from a bit of a sleep in this morning.
Fair enough. I liked the sleep in. We got a bit of that. Excellent breakfast at the hotel.
Oh, Matt, that's an absolute top-notch breakfast where we were staying down the Marriott at the Rogers Centre. I'll tell you what, yeah, you had a good old sleep in. I was up at Sparrows Fart up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Had a stomp and a romp around old Toronto. I used to live here. Do you know that?
Yeah, you mentioned a few times that you went to University of Toronto.
I did indeed, and I had a great time heading around my old stomping grounds from many, many years ago. A bit of a trip down memory lane, down Philosopher's Walk and what have you. But right now, back at the venue, of course, here at GP Toronto, you're at the Pro Show. My name's Riley Knight, joined by Eduardo Sajgalik, of course. And here we have Storm versus Eldrazi Tron post-board, where things are, well, a lot more intricate, a lot more moving pieces of the puzzle, as we see in Goblin Electromancer on turn 2. And that's the perfect start here for Scherer.
Right, and what's interesting here is that Caleb's plan doesn't fundamentally change. He still prefers speed because he knows that Ben has still a limited number of interaction against his creatures. So Caleb's plan is probably to keep in a large number of these creatures, stay as speedy as possible, but potentially boarding in those pieces of the puzzle in order to dig to the hate pieces. The most important card that Caleb for sure will have boarded in, though, is Shattering Spree. That card, essentially the interact with Chalice, even if it was on 1, is that the copy of Shattering Spree that you do play gets countered, but all the replicated copies resolve. So you get to kill multiple Chalices with this card. That's
pretty tight play, as we saw that exact interaction happen earlier with a Grapeshot. Not something that a lot of people would have been across. I myself was a bit hazy on that interaction before we saw it on the screen today here, Eduardo. Goblin Electromancer Beats getting in for 2 here on the backup Beats plan, you think?
That for me is nope. I don't have it.
Okay, that's the sort of hidden, the secret mode of Electromancer. There, it does indeed swing for 2. Weitz now with is that a natural Tron?
That is a natural Tron.
Oh, this game is so easy. Magic the Gathering is just such an easy game, as we see a Walking Ballista for a Squillion here. Unsubstantiate the response for Weitz, and that's a nice little tempo play here for Scherer, but I mean, he's got a lot of work to do in the face of this natural Tron draw.
Right. Essentially, Caleb forced to unsubstantiate the Ballista to protect his Goblin Electromancer. The biggest drawback of that card you can hear is that he's down a card. With the Mulligan, that means that he's down. So if he can't combo off very soon, he's going to be in dire straits. And it seems like his hand is 2 Rituals and a Repeal. So what Caleb is missing is a way to, well, to put it simply, go off.
Yeah.
To go further. So Okay.
He's going to go for it here, and I would just like to mention already, Eduardo, I've embarrassed myself. I've just punted a big one up the field. He did play an expedition map. It was not a natural Tron. So I've got a roasting egg on my face. But right now it's all about Caleb Scherer and his attempt to go off here, because I tell you what, the clock is against him. 7 mana available for Weitz when he untaps, perhaps even more. So he's got to do some work here to get it done. Repeal the Goblin Electromancer. This draw is going to be huge.
Yeah, Caleb deciding I cannot win if my opponent untaps and plays Walking Ballista, so I'm going to go for broke. There is also an element here that at least he gets to keep his mana creature for later. So even if Ben has a Walking Ballista, he can basically place his rituals in response to the Walking Ballista killing the Electromancer, allowing him to generate some mana, and with Manamorphose some cards potentially too, before it gets killed.
That Storm counter, I believe, at 3 now.
That may be the case. However, it seems like Caleb might be done here. We'll just see how far this goes, though.
So, Manamorphose, both players helping out here. Collaborative effort to keep track of all these interactions here. Draws a card, finds a Serum Visions. Going to cast it. Storm count up to 5. Tell you what, this is one of the lower percentage attempts that we've seen. What my belief here is that Caleb doesn't believe that he can actually storm off. He does have a land, so there was a very low percentage chance of doing so. But Caleb is potentially just digging to more cards because he was down on cards by so much. His line was, I have a very low percentage to storm off, but my line is I'm going to go as far as I can down my deck so that if I do draw a Past in Flames, I can then go off with the cards in my graveyard later down the line. Okay, so setting up for future turns, maybe hoping, the big Hail Mary, hoping that the cards might come together, but no, fizzling out a little bit there, and ending with the Chief of Compliance coming down back to Weitz now, who again has got a whole boatload of mana to cast and use, and it is a Thought Not Seer.
Yeah, Thought Not Seer here, one of the most powerful cards from Ben Weitz in a matchup like this. Clock plus Disruption, very powerful.
And often very unlikely that the 4/4 exits the battlefield to reclaim that lost card.
Yeah, it's essentially Thoughtseize with 4/4.
Not a bad card.
Actually, it's even better because it exiles the cards, so no Past in Flame shenanigans, nothing. Just the 4/4 body and lose a card.
Just slaps it out. Get that out of here, he says.
Yeah.
Oh no, and the Walking Ballista to take care of Baral. Things not looking good for Scherer at all. Ships the turn back to Weitz, who is again clocking him for 4, and I think that clock is only going to increase. Weitz with the full grip cards. What can he bring to bear in this turn here, Eduardo? I mean, what are the percentages here? Weitz well and truly on track to steam to victory.
Sure, and what Caleb needs is, because he had 2 Desperate Rituals, would have been a Past in Flames, but this Chalice is shutting down most things, so... Caleb needed basically, without this Chalice, to draw a Past in Flames. Even without a mana creature, being able to go Desperate Ritual, splice Desperate Ritual would add 2 mana, turning it into a kind of Sieving Song Light effect, so adding 2 mana rather than 1. But unfortunately, with this Chalice and this Ballista, it seems like Caleb is most likely going to lose next turn, unless he drew... unless he had Shattering Spree, that was basically it. Shattering Spree to kill the Ballista, and Chalice would have done the trick, but since he doesn't have it, Ben pumping the Walking Ballista up is probably going to do the trick here since Caleb's at 12.
Yep, so that should be enough. 4/4 plus another 4/4 coming in, and 4 damage to the dome with the Ballista, and that is that. Caleb Scherer goes down in straight sets. Eldrazi Tron, something you mentioned before, Eduardo, it's important to hit on, is the fact that we see big mana decks going down to Storm a lot of the time, but Eldrazi Tron in a much better position than traditional Tron to tussle with Storm opponents.
Right, so the main argument to playing a deck like Eldrazi Tron is that your mid-range creatures will help you in matchups that would otherwise be atrocious. And this is a perfect example of why you would want to be on Eldrazi Tron rather than Tron, is that matchup.
Well, we're going to check over now with one of our back tables. It looks like Julian Figueiredo, oh my goodness me, needed a big run up on that one and completely just, I've completely fizzled there. I do apologize, Julian. Versus Matt Dilks. Slammed that one home, Eduardo. Don't even worry about it here. Affinity versus blue-red Pyromancer. What kind of finish are we looking at here from the Pyromancer deck?
So the Pyromancer deck, for me, the breakout deck out of that top 8 for Rivals of Ixalan. Really an invention by Pascal Viren, who identified that the best way to play these blue-red combo decks was to replace the combo pieces with useful cards. So Mathew Dilks decided to play, instead of the free Finger in the Ice Young Pyromancer split, 4 Young Pyromancers, believing that Young Pyromancer was the right path. And in a matchup like this, where you have blue, like normally the blue-red decks tend to be favored against Affinity. Now, this seems like a weird statement, seeing that Affinity is in a losing position in this exact moment due to a wide board. But the blue-red decks tend to have a lot of dig, so it's very easy for them to get to their key cards, things, especially in the sideboard, like a Braid or Anger of the Gods, or even a Pia and Kirin Nalar that could get rid of Affinity's board, plus Snapcaster Mage, Lightning Bolt, Electrolyze, like all these cards that really deal well with Affinity's threats.
Well, right now, Figueiredo has got a huge board presence versus Dilks. Not looking at much here. We can't see exactly what's going on in his hand, but he's going to need something special now because it looks like Figueiredo is wanting to attack for what looks like very close to lethal.
Indeed, but against a blue-red deck, you can never believe that it is good to go because they always have cards, they always have Cryptic Command, they always have Snapcaster Mage.
So Matt Dilks now, 1 mana, and we're going to see a Lightning Bolt on the Signal Pest. That's going to reduce the clock by a fair bit here, more or less cutting it in half.
Well, at least not dead this turn, which is a pretty important criteria.
Not quite half, let's be honest.
One interesting sideboard card from Julian here is that Nihil Spellbomb. Most Affinity lists that would run Graveyard Hate either go way overboard with something like Rest in Peace, or tend to play Grafdigger's Cage, which has utility against Collected Company decks, or Relic of Progenitus, because it draws a card and you don't really mind what's in your graveyard. So it's a bit of a strange choice to have Nihil Spellbomb, which is usually a card played in decks that care about their own graveyard, that want Graveyard Hate. Yeah,
typically decks that run things like Tarmogoyf or what have you as well, or, you know, the Grixis Death Shadow lists, they'll play a Nihil Spellbomb, but here, but no, looks like Figueiredo's gone for a split between the Grafdigger's Cage as a one-of, and then the 2 Spellbombs, so he does value the utility of the Spellbomb, which is quite odd, I would say.
The main argument for running the Spellbomb is one you see here is one of speed. So you don't need an extra mana, unlike Relic of Progenitus, to crack it. So Julian was worried more about, I want a 1 mana play that I don't need to hold 1 mana up for later in the game. Although here it is costing Julian a card. So that decision, it's interesting because in a long tournament, those decisions of which sideboard cards to run and like wherever you draw a card or not actually matter, because all these little micro cards and decisions matter in a long tournament. So even in like a decision like this of running Spellbomb or Relic of Progenitus can change your win percentage by a few points, even though it's an innocent sideboard card.
So Dilks now getting aggressive on the front foot with a Snapcaster Mage, dancing down the wicket, going to beat Figueiredo around a little bit. And we're back to him now. Again, an enormous army has been assembled here.
Yeah, the Snapcaster basically going in because what happens a lot of the time when you face Affinity is they have infinite flyers, so might as well get in there.
And a Cryptic Command here. We're going to see tap draw, the classic mode, the classic keeping your snoot above water mode here for Matt Dilks. Tap the team. Draw a card.
Yeah. A micro disappointment on my side. It might be correct to not bounce the Snapcaster Mage in this spot, but my heart bleeds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, bounce that Snapcaster. Play the Snapcaster again, flashback the Cryptic Command, bounce the Snapcaster again. Oh yeah. Get on that value train. Toot all aboard. Back to Dilks now.
Yeah. Of course, an extremely risky play in the face of something like a Galvanic Blast, which, if Julian's playing a basic mountain, is all but assured he has in his list. If I was playing from Matt's seat and
full 4.
Yeah, when we look at his list, full 4. So.
Full 4 of them. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah. When you look at the basic land that Affinity has in their deck is actually an extremely big clue as to whether they're running Galvanic Blast or more Masters and Thoughtcast. If you see an island, you know you don't have to play as much around Galvanic Blast. So you can be more safely at 4 life against those decks because they have a basic island. So if you're playing against Affinity, it's important to check the basic island.
And that'll often come up, especially if you're playing things like Path to Exile, Ghost Quarter. You get access to that pretty soon here. Yeah. So here is now Serum Visions. I can tell you that Julian Figueiredo is playing 2 copies of the Master of Ethereum, in addition to 2 Etched Champions in the main. Only 3 Memnites, which I don't know how Dr. Frank Carsten would feel about that. Thoughtseize in the main as well for Figueiredo.
Yeah. Thoughtseize in the main is a really interesting decision. The one of is usually every card in your main deck that's a color spell tends to have a huge cost for Affinity because you need the artifacts for every piece of synergy. Thoughtseize is probably one of the better cards to play in the dark. So it's an interesting choice to have. I think it will surprise a lot of his opponents. I'm not sure how effective it is because there are hands where you can't cast it or where you really need that extra artifact from Mox Opal or plating. So it's a tough one, but yeah.
It's a weird one because, Thoughtseize is what you often want to cast on turn number 1, right?
Sure.
To disrupt the opponent as early as possible. But that's not what Affinity's about. They want to just spew permanents onto the battlefield. They don't want to disrupt early.
Right. It might also be that if I look at Julian's list, he decided to just put a sideboard card in the main deck.
Sure.
Because he doesn't run over an extra edge champion, he only runs 2. That would seem to be what he went for. But yeah, here the Snapcaster Cryptic.
Classic play.
Yes.
The classic play, keeping him alive once again, as we see now. Arcbound, nope, okay. Not going to cast that in my combat step. I'll wait to get to the main phase to cast that one there. And so now... Oh, no, yeah. So Figueiredo there tapped his creature to generate mana with Springleaf Drum and then attempted to cast the Arcbound Ravager in the middle of the combat step.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. But in the end, he gets there, tapping both of his lands, doing it the traditional way, trying to eke out that value, Eduardo, but didn't quite go his way.
Something that's a little strange. I'm not sure if that Cryptic Command should be in Matt's graveyard. Maybe we saw incorrectly, but I believed that
it should be exiled. Yeah, great pick up there. We'll get that Cryptic Command exiled because it was indeed cast from the graveyard. Unless we're mistaken, unless he flashed in a Snapcaster Mage, did nothing, then cast another Cryptic Command somehow. But no, I think it should be exiled there. Yes,
there
indeed. We see it all fixed up. More beats from the Snapcaster Mage. Figueiredo's going to take it on the chin, and back to him now. How many Cryptic Commands can Matt Dilks cast, Eduardo?
Let's see. Matt Dilks has access to the full 4.
Okay.
So 8.
He can cast it 8 times. He's going to need to probably as well to keep himself in it as well. I mean, what are the ways that Dilks can pull ahead here?
Essentially, what he needs to draw is his copy of Anger of the Gods. Anger will allow him to sweep most of the board apart from this Arcbound Ravager. And then he has Field of Ruin for both of the to kind of combat the creature lands. And he will then need something to deal with that enormous Ravager that is going to survive the Anger or allow a creature to survive the Anger.
Well, what seems to be happening right now is Figueiredo is getting stuck in here with a big attack and a interesting block here from Dilks, who seems to have a lot more to say about this combat step just yet.
Yeah, Dilks is forced here to block the Ravager with Snapcaster Mage, since otherwise it would represent a lethal threat. So might as well do that block. Of course, Julian, if he believes Matt had nothing, could sacrifice enough artifacts to make another lethal threat. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
So Field of Ruin now.
Yeah.
It's going to take care of the Inkmoth Nexus.
Yeah, and you can see here how good Field of Ruin is. Just basically, most Affinity lists only run 1 land. So being able to destroy... You basically end up in a situation where, well, I don't have another land to search, so yeah.
There was a story that came out of an Australian tournament many years ago where an Affinity player mulliganed at a 6, his opponent with Ghost Quarter. He opened with Basic Mountain.
Sure.
And so the opponent opened with Ghost Quarter, Strip Mine You.
Sure.
And his opponent didn't draw another land for the entire game because they only played the 1. It was such a hot shot there and just completely locked him out of the game on turn 1. Something to keep in mind there.
Yeah. Yeah, if you run a Ghost Quarter deck, you can be safe, or a Path to Exile deck, you can be pretty safe in assuming Affinity has 1 basic. We're far away from the time. There was a time where Affinity ran a second one in the board in very specific situations. But because the deck has so much artifact mana and Springleaf Drum and Mox Opal, there's essentially 25 mana sources in the deck, so it's totally so the mana denial plan is not usually that great anyways. So 1 basic's totally fine here.
Just a way to get some value out of that first Path to Exile or what have you. But here, Matt Dilks is continuing to keep himself alive as we see a Harvest Pyre and a Lightning Bolt both snapped off, and another Snapcaster Mage is going to continue to interact with Figueiredo's plan here.
Yeah, and this is where you can see the blue-red deck pulling ahead. It basically the way for the blue-red deck to pull ahead is this. You basically go, okay, I'm going to trade 1 for 1, and then I'm going to Snapcaster and trade for 1 more card and for 1 more card until essentially you run your opponent out of resources. That's how the blue-red deck wins.
And the only reason this was able to happen is because Dilks had such a huge amount of mana. 8 mana meant that he could chain all these spells together, and the reason he got there was because he kept chaining those Cryptic Commands, and as you mentioned, drawing cards,
yes,
hitting those land drops, finding a way forward. And right now, he's looking to stabilize on 5 life. As you mentioned, all he needs now is a removal spell for this Arcbound Ravager, or how about infinite blockers?
Infinite Blocker sounds great. Here, though, it's worth noting that the Inkmoth Nexus is potentially lethal. Maybe not right now, because I think we're missing a little bit of damage. The Mox Opal, let's see, that makes it 5 if you sack the Ravager plus the plating. So the plating with the artifacts would be 4 extra, 1 power, 4 counters. So I think we're 1 artifact off, if I'm not miscounting. But this is the hard point for Affinity, is do you go all in anyways? And Julian might have to consider that option. And also, Julian is paying the price. He does have Etch Champion in hand, but he is paying the price for only running 2, since that's one of the best cards you can have in these matchups. It basically dodges all removal, and once you get a Cranial Plating or Arcbound Ravager counters on that card, it tends to go totally out of control.
So here is the Etch Champion. Looks like Figueiredo is going to have to take his foot off the accelerator here for just a moment. Oh, and it's a Ceremonious Rejection. That's a very tidy answer there. Protection from everything, but not protection from Ceremonious Rejection, Eduardo.
Yep. Ceremonious Rejection, a card that massively gained popularity just after Kaladesh was printed, and the card was released. It started slotting as a 2 or 3 of in many blue sideboards. Not just because it's good against Affinity, but it's so great against the Tron decks.
So good against Tron. It's so good against such a broad proportion of Tier 1 decks in Modern. It's a great include, and I think blue sideboard should include at the minimum 2, maybe 3.
Right, yeah. People have gone away from free down to 2 as the metagame has changed a little bit. And you realize that with all this dig, like 2 is probably okay because of Snapcaster Mage. And you want other options. So basically someone that's playing like the blue-red Pyromancer deck decides to go for 2 Abrade and 2 Ceremonious Rejection to have this hybrid between I will deal with your board or I will deal with your spells on the stack.
Master of Ethereum a play now for Figueiredo, and Dilks looking to be in a position to stabilize as comfortably as possible here as he shifts the turn, and that's not what you want to see. Is when your opponent's not digging, not looking for stuff, not finding a way for it. It's like, oh no, go ahead, buddy. You do what you want to do. You can, play with those cute little cards you got over here.
Right. And here for Julian, the fact that all his flyers got destroyed is a really big problem. Earlier in the game, we saw Julian have a huge board with a bunch of flyers, and something like Pyromancer at the time would not have been an issue because he had a ton of life and a lot of flyers, so he didn't really mind these elementals. But now that his big threats are this Arcbound Ravager and Master of Ethereum, it became a problem. Something to note is that now that Master's in play, that Inkmoth Nexus is potentially lethal, assuming Matt has nothing.
So 2-2 right now, pumped up by the Master of Ethereum. Looks like we're going to see a Cranial Plating activation. Yes, indeed. So Dilks, you would think, leaning heavily on some kind of answer here for the Inkmoth Nexus, which once again is going to whack in for a huge amount of poison.
Right. So here it's kind of a game of chicken. Essentially, Julian can decide whether... Essentially, Julian can go on a 2-turn clock by just attacking and saying, this is all okay. But he could also decide, you know what, I'm going to go for the 1-turn clock, sack my Ravager, and put counters on Inkmoth.
Because all of those 4 counters will be put on the Inkmoth Nexus if Figueiredo chooses to do that. And look at this, yes, shoves his chips into the middle of the table. Matt Dilks has got an Electrolyze by the look of things.
Yes, and this is the rationale behind not sacrificing the Ravager, is the possibility, the threat of activation, right?
Yeah.
So if Julian had decided to not activate the Ravager here, then Matt would have to take the infect damage, simply because if he doesn't, if he has only 1 spell and Julian can then sack the Ravager in response, essentially asking the question about, well, do you have something else?
It'll save it, right? So if he attacks with the just with the Inkmoth Nexus as it is, and then Dilks fires off that Electrolyze, then he'll sacrifice the Arcbound Ravager in response and grow it up into a big beefcake.
Right, exactly. So that would require 2 spells from Matt rather than the 0, essentially, since Electrolyze draws a card.
See, that wasn't great from... I don't like...
0 for 2, killing the Inkmoth, killing the Ravager. And yeah, as you mentioned, I understand why you don't like this, because I think there was plenty of space here for Julian to just go take the damage.
Just chill.
Yes.
Just chill, man. It's all good. Red spells cost 1 more to cast, but that's all good. You just chill. You don't need to play into... I mean, this is what the Pyromancer deck is full of. Instant speed interaction. And that's... 2. An extra 2 to... I've embarrassed myself. That's it. I'm going home. TBS on the card viewer. Schooling me. Professor Ben. I'm very, very sorry. I have to resubmit that homework.
Yeah, Ben played back when this card was illegal.
Oh, yes.
By the way, have you played Extended where this card existed? Because that was a pretty hard card to win against with red deck wins. Speaking of hate cards.
I'm not actually an ancient dinosaur. I'm very sorry.
Choke was also in this cycle, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes, but Choke exists in Modern because it's reprinted in 8th
reprint
edition.
in 8th edition, that's right. Figueiredo now. Pedal to the metal. In come the clowns. Volt Scourge coming in with the Master of Ethereum.
So I'm just trying to...
Snapcaster Mage, he's just got it all. He's just got it all, Matt Dilks.
That's how it works. That's how the Snapcaster Mage decks work. They just draw more cards into more Snapcasters, into more card draw.
Yeah.
And it just goes on.
How many
and on.
Snapcaster Mages playing? He's playing 7 or 8? Just 4.
Four.
He's drawn every one. Very powerful wizard.
It's very strong. But it's interesting here. Julian could have equipped the Cranial Plating, but declined to. So if I'm sitting in Matt's seats, I would believe that Julian has access to some sort of 2 or free drop in hand. 2 drop with the lands, or if I could see Julian's hand with the Mox Opal, a free drop that he wants to cast. So I would be aware of that. Since it's a bit strange to not equip the plating here.
So Dilks has just given us an absolute masterclass in how to tussle with Affinity in the later stages of the game, stabilizing at 5 life, doing everything he can, of course, and 5 is that magic number to stabilize on Eduardo there because, of course, Galvanic Blast.
Yes, a card that I believe Julian has in his hand. So being at 5 essentially being at 5 is infinitely better than 4 in this scenario. It's very similar to that guessing game where, you can remove, you have to not take the last chip out. You have 15 chips, and each person gets to remove a number. You just can't take the last one.
Yeah.
So it's arithmetic. You work it back. Okay, well, if he kills me with Galvanic Blast, I need to be at 5.
That's it. And Dilks has done an incredible job of that. I really love the way he's turned this game around now as we see a thing in the ice just further shoring up this match for Dilks, who has a tidy 1-0 lead after game number 1. Figueiredo has... had a rough job navigating the way through these final turns as Dilks turned the corner, stabilized, leveraged his removal, kept the cards going, and a good draw from him, admittedly, but Figueiredo has just had a hard time here.
That's fair. At the same time, I felt that Julian could have navigated some of those turns a little more cautiously. There wasn't a need to really slam the Ravager counters on the Ink Moth, in my view. So here, Julian.
All the star points. Look at this. 4 damage upstairs, and that is that. A handshake going to seal the deal here for Matt Dilks. And as you mentioned, perhaps Figueiredo putting a foot or 2 wrong in the position, but I'm very, very impressed by Matt Dilks playing to his outs, playing the way that this deck does. It stabilizes on a low life total, admittedly. These decks don't have access to a lot of life gain. And on 5 life, managing to turn the corner and get it done. A really strong performance from Matt Dilks right now.
Yeah, I really liked... it's very... I say I like what Matt did. At the same time, that's how those decks operate against Affinity. It's a matchup you want to see because of what you saw, right? The ability to turn back the corner with Snapcaster, Lightning Bolt, Cryptic. Electrolyze is just a horror show for Affinity on multiple levels. There we saw it be a 2 for 0. One of the more weird 2 for 0s, but or 0 for 2s.
But good on turn 3, good on turn 10 when flashback with a Snapcaster Mage. Any way you slice it, it's going to get it done. We are going to head back to our 3rd table now. We got Brian Liu up against Jamie Blanchette here. As we have a look at what these guys are playing, it looks like we've got a spicy number indeed on the left-hand side of your screen,
so
ladies and
excited.
gentlemen.
I'm looking at this deck list.
Crab. Here we go.
This deck list is incredible. Magus of the Bazaar.
I'll describe it. We see a lot of in Modern, I have to say.
It's a 0-1 for 2, I believe, that is a Bazaar of Baghdad. So draw. I believe it's draw to discard free, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not as much of a vintage player. I think it's a format I want to get into, but yeah, just Magus of the Bazaar, Hedron Crab, Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, Sidisi's Fateful. So this is Rally the Ancestors combo.
Yeah, wow, we got an old aristocrat style deck here.
Well, yeah, it is an aristocrat. Oh my gosh, this list is amazing. Rally the Ancestors, Bridge from Below. This is a spicy number right here.
Wow, we're going to see things go. And he's 1-1 against one of the best decks in the format in 5-color humans. Brian Liu revealing the multiple Ether Vial draw, and he's going to go down to 6 here. As I have a look over his list, pretty traditional. He's gone for the Ether Vial above something like the Collected Company. 2 Kessig Malcontents notable there. Only 3 Phantasmal Image, which is not a number that I like deck. I think the full 4 is exactly where you want to be in Modern. But,
I would agree with that, yeah.
Not a huge amount of surprise in Brian Liu's list, so let's continue talking about what Blanchette's up to here, shall we?
I mean, there is one important card for fans of cool decks that you need to know from Brian Liu's decks, which is that one Rest in Peace.
Oh, yeah.
If that hits play, a lot of what Jamie is doing goes out the window.
About it, isn't it? So Heatron Krabs gets cards into the bin nice and quickly. Jace Vryn Prodigy is also going to help us there, but it's things like Bloodghast and, Zulaport Cutthroat Blood Artist, essentially the same card in this situation, doing a lot of work in making sure these cards hit the bin. And Viscera Seer is the way to eventually get that payoff after having resolved a big rally. People remember Rally of the Ancestors from a couple of years ago in Standard, and here it is doing the rounds in Modern as well. Esper Rally, not a deck I expected to see today, Eduardo.
I think no one did except for Jamie and his friends. But what's interesting here for the post-board plan, it seems like Jamie's post-board plan is probably going to be to remove that Bloodghast that you mentioned, and some of the more the less creature matchup friendly cards like a Jace Vryn's Prodigy may get taken out, because his plan is probably to have Bridge from Below and Rally the Ancestors, a sack outlet like Viscera Seer, Drown Rusalka or Bloodthorn Vampire, to essentially create an army of zombies that the human deck can't deal with. And essentially not deviate too much from his main deck plan. His sideboard, I would only see maybe 2 Path to Exiles and maybe the Tidehollow Scholars come in.
It's one of those lists that you really can't over sideboard. You can't tune and tweak too much because you don't want to dilute the combo here too much. So as we see now, the Magus of the Bazaar coming down. This is a bit of a bizarre card, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. By the way, I love the full greed on Jamie's side to play that Oboro rather than second basic Island. Basically, he's playing the Oboro because of the synergy with Jace Vryn's Prodigy and Magus of the Bazaar. But yeah, it's mostly better than an Island until you face a Blood Moon.
Yeah, and then then you feel like a real goober for having included it. But Jamie Blanchette's also playing a very interesting card in the form of Sidisi's Faithful.
Yes, and that's why this Thalia is not really a card. Like, normally it's the card you want against a combo deck.
It's not here, though, at all, is it?
Exactly.
It's actually pretty horrific, with 28 creatures in the deck of Jamie Blanchette here. It's not doing what you would think it was. And here we see a Magus of the Bazaar activation. If you told me this morning as I got up that we would be seeing Bazaar of Baghdad-like effects in Modern, I'd be saying, mate, pull your head out. What are you doing? What are you talking about?
Modern is great.
Modern is it is just the best. So, discarding now for Blanchette. Looks like a Jace, a Viscera Seer, and a Plains. And here's a Heatron Crab.
Yeah, so
mill for 3.
Yep, that synergy with Fishlands, mill for 6.
Oh, yeah.
So Jamie's hand has a Rally the Ancestors, and Jamie's plan, essentially, those Sidisi's Faithful are very key cards. Not so much because of Thalia, but because Meddling Mage is a card that is very dangerous for Jamie. So I'm a little I would be surprised that the Sidisi's Faithful got put to the graveyard by the Magus of the Bazaar. But essentially, Jamie has access to Rally of the Ancestors and wants to have that full combo turn. Mm-hmm. And having a way to bounce creatures for a midway rally is important, plus the sack outlets. Combined with the fact here that he also has access to a Path to Exile, so he's less worried about a Meddling Mage than he would be in a pre-board game. Although, for someone to name Rally the Ancestors pre-board with a Meddling Mage, that would be pretty impressive if you name that in the dark.
Oh, yeah, on game 1?
Yeah, you have to Kitesail Freebooter, essentially, and understand. Because if you could see like some of these cards in play and go like, yeah, he has Rally the Ancestors, that would be a stroke of genius.
What are you going to do, beat him to death with 0-1s and 0-3s?
Okay, there's clearly something happening.
So a Path to Exile on the Thalia now in response to this Ether Vial trigger, by the look of things.
Yeah, and if I'm fully honest, I'm not the biggest fan here. I think Jamie had time, and Meddling Mage is a much more dangerous and scary card than Thalia, since Thalia only asks you to wait a turn, and essentially Brian has to slam the Meddling Mage, because if he doesn't, like, Jamie gets access to his Rally the Ancestors. And because it's an instant, he can like do it in response to a Vial. So it's not like Brian can really, just wait on the Meddling Mage. He has to slam it, which means that Jamie would have had the reign to use his Path to Exile or cast the Rally in response to Vial activation. So I'm really not a big fan here of pathing the Thalia because I don't think it's a real problem for Jamie, while Meddling Mage would be.
So Brian Liu, did he not find the plane? Oh, this is in his hand.
Of course.
Do you just shuffle just to have just for the big make 'em ups?
I think it's okay to relook at your deck. Why not? But
just to refresh yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
When the clock is low, though, I'm less of a fan of that.
Yeah, it's actually not ideal. I didn't see the planes in his hand, so I thought fair enough, he can go searching. But yeah, that's not great. Meddling Mage going to come down here for Liu after he's slammed in with the Mantis Rider. And presumably you would name...
Rally the Ancestors.
Oh, not Subhedian Empires Volume 7?
No,
the old Magic
I love that
Online
card in Time
Misclick.
Spiral Limited, by the way.
Is it still on the top of the cards to select on, or is it now like Abandon Hope?
It depends on the format.
Oh, okay. All right.
Abandon Hope being a Tempest card.
Back over now to Blanchette, who mills another 3 away with this landfall trigger from the Hedron Crab. Milling himself, of course, because that is how he ultimately performs his combo, bringing creatures back from the graveyard. He wants a nice full graveyard, Eduardo.
Yeah.
And that's why we see the rather counterintuitive. I'm sure many newer players will be like, what are you doing, mate? Mill your opponent. That's why mill's so good. You always mill over their good cards.
Milling yourself is so much better.
That's so weird, though. It's so weird. I remember watching Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, first Pro Tour I ever watched.
Sure.
And Alexander Hayne kept targeting himself with his Thought Scours, and I had no idea why. I just couldn't figure out why you wouldn't, because that's why mill's so good, right? Because you mill over all their bombs, all their great cards.
It's pretty awkward, though, when they're playing a 4/6 Angel that reanimates every human in a graveyard.
Yeah, that's probably... I mean, I didn't quite put the pieces of that particular puzzle together, but all the same. Ether Vial up to 3, now back to Brian Liu. Blanchette without too much to do here.
Yeah, and not too much to do, basically because he decided to get rid of all his Sidisi's Faithful and Paths onto, basically the Path on Ephalia and the Sidisi's Faithful discarding it earlier, and he's paying the price here.
Oh dear, and that price is exactly 9 damage as well here, Eduardo. Wow, look at this. 3 Flying Vigilance Haste insects being chucked across the battlefield. Are we going to see Chris Pakula get up and about as well?
Well, I'm not sure that's quite Chris Pakula right there.
No, it's an alternate art version of Chris Pakula there.
Yeah, I think that's one of his biggest pet peeves is that the reprint doesn't have his original art.
I actually did check on Twitter. He did actually publicly state that he doesn't mind the reprinted art being referred to as Chris Pakula, however. So he's into it. Okay. He's into it.
As long as his name is mentioned, it's
yes,
okay?
Yes, exactly. That's it.
Is it like a reverse Beetlejuice, essentially?
I'm not sure exactly what the situation is with him, but I know the original Meddling Mage, Chris Pakula, of course, won the Invitational to get his face on the card. I think it was the first one as well, first Invitational. And the card has all of a sudden been thrust back into the spotlight here in Modern, Eduardo.
Yeah, it might have been, I think it was the third. Avalanche Rider and there was like Trade Water Riders or something, like a card you would never
Not
play.
Trade Wind Rider?
No, it was a 1/2 from Masks.
Oh, okay.
A typical unplayable card from the... Yeah. There might have also been Sylvan Safekeeper that came later in Judgment.
Colorado. Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, Meddling Mage, though, is one of the most impactful invitational cards. We actually saw another one, Snapcaster Mage, in the previous match.
Yeah. And Dark Confident as well, way up the top of that list.
Yeah. So here, by the way, you see Jamie being in a really rough spot, and he actually drew the Path to Exile he needed, but this is a situation he could have avoided.
Oh, no! He does have the Path to Exile, and he's showing Brian Liu that he doesn't have triple white to be able to cast both cards at the same time.
Well, this is what happens when you discard your 0/4s that are specifically designed to bounce cards like Meddling Mage.
Dear. Dear.
I can't help but think that here Jamie had the pieces to win this game, but the decision making led him into a path that meant that he couldn't win. Since this path, essentially, the path can't stop free Mantis Riders. There's no flying blocker. There's nothing really Jamie can do, since he can't cast Rally the Ancestors, since that's for sure the card that Brian named on Meddling Mage. The path cannot get rid of the Meddling Mage and allow Jamie to cast that Rally. So Jamie's basically out of options, most likely here.
The observation that you made before, Eduardo, is that Blanchette mistargeted with that original Path to Exile because he targeted Thalia. Now, you'd think Thalia obviously excellent against graveyard decks, against combo decks of all kinds, but in this situation, really not the biggest threat for Blanchette to have to get through. This misstep, which was made 4 turns ago?
Turn free.
Whatever.
First activation of Magus of the Bazaar.
Was something that has really tied him up in knots here.
Right, and that's essentially something you have to be alert to in Modern. Is if you're going to play some strange combo deck like this, more power to you. That's great. But be aware of what cards are awkward for you or not and have plans against them. Think in each matchup, what are the cards that are a problem for me and what do I need to do? Because you're getting value from your combo deck being unknown, but you need to make sure that you understand exactly how other decks will operate against you. on the more likely cases. So yeah, here Jamie not able to cast that rally because of Meddling Mage. The Path to Exile not good enough. Essentially, Brian is going to win next turn, barring. But by the way, something weird that Jamie did was mill a Disenchant. So I suspect that game 2 came down to that Rest in Peace.
And all of a sudden here, the end of the line for Jamie Blanchette's undefeated run. Unfortunately, one of the sweetest decks you're going to see in the format, ladies and gentlemen, but it has gone down. And no shame in it to the 5-color humans list, of course. They're chasing themselves around for maybe a second handshake here, these two fellas here. They're not sure what's going on there. As we see, the match slipped all finished and done and dusted. But of course, as we said, no shame in going down to 5-color humans here, Eduardo. Really one of the best new decks in the format.
Yeah, that deck really picked up steam very fast. And the Disruption Creature Suite and the fact that you have both threats and answers in one package, plus your land count is your flooding count is very low because you have 4 horizontal canopies.
That's the way it goes there for round number 3 here at GP Toronto. We'll be back. We've got to go to a break, but stick around on the other side of this. More Modern Magic coming your way from Canada. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the tournament floor here at GP Toronto. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to continued coverage of this modern event from Canada. My name's Riley, joined by Eduardo Sajgalik, the Canadian hero, of course. And we are just about up to round number 4. But before that, we're going to check in with some Time Walk magic. We have our fourth and final table, game number 3 between Yuta Takahashi and Mathew Hawton here. Now, Jeskai control, a little bit of a misnomer for this list here, Eduardo, because this is the straight-up tempo list, right?
Yeah, so one of the biggest mistakes you can do with Jeskai is just calling them Jeskai Control or just Jeskai Tempo. They are 2 different decks. The main difference is that the Tempo decks play Geist Draft. Yuta Takahashi is playing the quadruple Geist Draft deck that performed the best at the Pro Tour.
Oh, yeah, baby. Yeah. We got 4 Geist, 4 Snapcaster, 4 Spell Queller. He's not mucking around. And then from there on, it's just burn spells, removal, and counter spells. I love this deck. It is a ton of fun to play. And if you are interested in playing Celestial Colonnade but don't want to sit there for an hour and a half grinding it out with cryptic commands, this is the deck to do it. It is a ton of fun, as I said, to play. But we're up against Eldrazi Tron, and you had a look at this list, and it is just about as stock as it gets.
Yeah, there's very few surprises here. I mean, it is a colorless deck, so how many surprises can you actually engineer into it is a more debatable point. The more important card for Mathew here is those Cavern of Souls. I'm a little surprised he boarded in Pivy Needle, since the only cards I can really think of that I would want to name with that are Celestial Colonnade.
And he's done exactly that, by the way.
Yeah, but it's a bit strange. Because I feel like the Needle got boarded in mostly because there wasn't anything else. I think like in cases like this, sometimes it's better to believe that your main deck card is better. Just you don't need to over sideboard, right? Like Eldrazi Tron especially has a ton of threats, so boarding out any of your threats is probably incorrect. The Chalices on 1 against the Jeskai decks are super powerful to avoid Path to Exiles, Lightning Bolts, and Snapcaster Recursion on those. And the relics are pretty nice there. So there's already enough material, so I'm a bit surprised to see the Needle come in for that reason.
So Matter Reshaper off an Urza's tower here, and this was the natural turn 3 Tron. This game is very easy once again, as we've all seen here. Yeah. And a Thought-Knot Seer is... Oh, another Thought-Knot Seer now is going to meet a Spell Queller. Oh, sorry, it was a Matter Reshaper first, and then a Thought-Knot Seer, excuse me. They got much more similar art than I realized at first blush.
Yeah, the Eldrazi all look like they're devouring everything.
Yeah, man.
And look very strange. But yeah, the Spell Queller here, one of the key cards in the matchup, it doesn't get rid of Reality Smasher, but being able to get rid of an on-curve Thought-Knot Seer is very powerful. Anything but a turn 2 Thought-Knot Seer basically gets taken by Spell Queller and allows you to put pressure, especially since Eldrazi Tron has a very limited amount of removal and would probably board out 1 or 2 of their All Is Dust, since they don't want too many against the Jeskai decks and a lot of their counter magic.
It looked like Hawton was trying to bait out that Spell Queller as well with the opening things up with the Reshaper, but as it is, Yuta Takahashi did not fall for the bait and has snagged the bigger threat as a result. Back to Hawton now. Yuta Takahashi is in a position to start leveraging cards like Cryptic Command and what have you. You can see a Snapcaster Mage in his hand. And now we're going to see, with the Matter Reshaper trigger on the stack, we are going to see Thought-Knot Seer be able to be cast again.
So they're basically talking about the order here, basically which one happens first. Does Thought-Knot get cast first, or you get the card from Matter Reshaper? And essentially, since Mathew is the active player, his trigger goes on the stack first, which means that the Spell Queller trigger will resolve first. So first Thought-Knot Seer comes in before the card gets seen. So this is more like an information piece. So yeah, and here, Yuta Takahashi deciding to Path to Exile the Thought-Knot Seer, since it's basically his answer.
And this is not a particularly complicated situation. I'm not sure what the players were having a jibber-jabber about here, but so he's going to draw a card from the Thought-Knot Seer leaving the battlefield after Mathew Hawton has fetched out a Wastes, presumably. We're going to see it come down here from Oath of the Gatewatch. Now Yuta Takahashi gets to draw a card from the second ability of the Thought-Knot Seer, and then Hawton will get to look at his hand and exile a card, even though the Thought-Knot Seer is not on the battlefield.
Right. The next question was, what happens with Matter Reshaper? Is it before or after all this? The answer is after all this. Right, because Mathew is the active player.
Yeah.
Which is important because there might be something else to do.
And Yuta Takahashi is reminding him now, after Mathew Hawton has gone to resolve the Eldrazi, the Matter Reshaper here.
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting spot because Mathew decided to resolve his Matter Reshaper trigger while the exile a card with Thought-Knot Seer was still there, but he had declared it, so it's a little weird.
You can't miss it.
Right.
You can miss it in a vacuum, but once you've demonstrated awareness of the trigger, you can't then go back and miss it.
Right. The problem is that Mathew gets the information that he's going to get an Eldrazi Temple.
That is a problem. That is actually a problem.
So I'm curious to what the resolution is here, since this is a little bit of a stickier situation. This is Time Walk, I believe, so we'll just have to see what has happened. But yeah, just to talk about how the match is going and all that. Yuta's hand looks super stacked. He has Spell Queller, Snapcaster, and I said it was stacked, and then I saw 2 lands at the back. So
half of it's stacked. Yeah. The other half is a crumbling pile of ruin. But yes, we've got big stacks and both some slops and some props in the hands of Yuta Takahashi here.
Yeah. The extra land is okay. You need to discard something when you get rid of Reality Smasher anyways. But the second land there, especially if Mathew exiles one of those key cards in Spell Queller or Snapcaster, probably the Snapcaster if I'm honest, because once Mathew knows that there's a Spell Queller, he can play around that card or he can remove it later down the line. The Snapcaster for me is, if you're in the dark and you Thought-Knot Seer or Thoughtseize or Inquisition your opponent and you're not sure what card to take and a Snapcaster Mage is present, I strongly advise to take the Snapcaster Mage. It is usually correct.
Because it's most often whatever card they need it to be, right?
Yes. And you may, unless you believe that you will win the game before it becomes a threat, which is extremely rare. So, or you have pieces of Graveyard Disruption that make it worse. But in the dark, in normal games, you should usually take the Snapcaster just because you're not sure what can happen. So it's good to, essentially give less options to your opponent that way. They're forced to use the cards as printed rather than Snapcaster and the wealth of information in the graveyard.
So it looks like this judge call is ongoing here during this Time Walk match. It looks like we've got some things to get through here because the judges still seem to be resolving the situation on screen, and not a lot of action going on right now as this question is resolved here. So
yeah, right. So, by the way, for the match here as well on the Eldrazi Tron side, I got to spot another Thought-Knot Seer. I got to spot a Reality Smasher. So I would give the edge to Mathew here just because his threat count is much higher than the Jeskai Control's answer count. And I think that's how this matchup usually goes down, is that Eldrazi Tron will be favored. Because for Jeskai to win, they can't really out-threat the Eldrazi Tron deck. It's really difficult, so they have to out-answer the threats. And that's, first the condition is you have to respond to everything that the Eldrazi deck does, and then you have to out-threat them. And because you need both these conditions, while Eldrazi Tron just needs more threats and nothing else, usually, that means that Eldrazi Tron has a slight edge. The fact that they have 2 Cavern of Souls plus 4 maps to get them means that they can make a lot of their spells uncounterable in the face of something like a Logic Knot or what some versions play, like Cryptic Command. It doesn't help for Spell Queller, but yeah, getting a Cavern of Soul Reality Smash is a good way to destroy a control deck's day.
So, we finally have the resolution. We have Snapcaster Mage being cast, and we have the Spell Queller being exiled to the Thought-Knot Seer trigger, and now we will see the Eldrazi Temple come into play for Mathew Hawton. So, a bit of a sloppy, loosey-goosey kind of line there taken by Hawton, but in the end, it looks like things are resolved. I'm sure a judge was on hand to make sure we got an equitable solution to that problem here. A Relic of Progenitus.
This was, by the way, one of the more interesting sequences I got to see. Essentially, Yuta decided to run out his Snapcaster to make sure it did do something, which meant that Mathew would have to pay the Piper if he decided to play one of his threats this turn into Path to Exile. Since pathing the Hangerback Walker is not a big issue for Mathew, so he could have decided to just play Relic and pass and have the path do nothing. Instead, Mathew decided to run out his Reshaper here, which I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of, since I think the Reshaper has value later down the line. But it's the line that Mathew decided to go for.
And he also chose not to play that Reality Smasher in hand as well, just to play around that very situation. As you mentioned, Ghost of St. Traff comes down here for Yuta Takahashi. Oh, hang on 1 second, my phone's ringing. Oh, it's 2012. They want their threats back.
I mean, I top 8'd a Pro Tour with that card.
In what year?
2012.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But Mathew Hawton now firing on all cylinders as we see this Walking Ballista come down, ready to scrap, ready to get it done as a 5/5 trample haste. And now, Geist does hit for 6, but Hawton is going to have a way to prevent that from happening with another Thought Not Seer. That's going to be on the blocksies quite easily here.
Yep, and not much for that Yuta can do here. I mean, there's a ton of threats on one side, and this is the problem with Geist against a full board. Yeah, I mean, you basically have a 2/2 versus a 5/5 trample haste creature that has more abilities than a 4/4 that has a drawback of drawing, and this is what happens.
And that's the way it goes with Mathew Hawton drawing well and truly enough threats there to outlast Yuta Takahashi, who is playing, once again, a very, very sweet deck from my perspective, but not quite enough to get it done against Eldrazi Tron. That is that for round number 3 here at Grand Prix Toronto. Thanks for your company so far. We're going to go to a break on the other side of this. TBS JVL live from GP Toronto. We'll see you back here very, very soon.